Okay, so I know the question's pretty obvious, but what questions do you all have about how do you structure your EBRs in a high touch CS strategy? Like, what questions come to mind just from that? And I can't. No one is raising their hands. I'm going to call on people.
So, Cheryl, hi. This is Jim Jones. I can't figure out how to raise my hand on the thing, so I'll just jump in and ask a question. I'm actually looking at a role at a company that's a B to B to C company, and I know how I'm experienced with doing EBRs for a B to B or a B to C company. I'm curious if there's anybody that's come out of that B to B to C realm, and C from it. David, good. You know what? I'll send you a connect request because I have lots of questions. But also, David, and I see a couple of thumbs up too. But I don't want to dominate the conversation, but how does it differ in a B to B to C world?
At least for me, my B2B, most of my career was in B2B2C. The last 5 years was spent at eBay, working for a B2B division that did e-commerce programs for large retailers. So all of their customers were retail consumers. And when we focus on customer experience, we have to focus a dual path in customer experience. We had two different journey maps. One was the retailer's journey map with us, and the other one was the customer's journey map with the retailer, because the customer knew of us as the retailer. So a great example would be Kate Spade or Dick's Sporting Goods, where we ran the entire e-commerce program for them. So we were really acting as Dick's or as Kate Spade or as Coach or Tumi or any one of our other customers. We had to understand the retailer's experience with us and the consumer's experience and their journey with the retailer. So we can talk offline so we don't dominate the conversation.
And just really fast, so I'm now seeing raised hands. Thank you, guys. To raise your hand if you want to, down in the bottom, there's a participants button. If you click on that, you have options to raise hand. So Azim, did I say that right?
Yes, you did, yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
I'd be curious from the group's perspective on specific tactics that people have deployed to ensure they get an executive or a C-suite person to attend to the EBR. Obviously, we typically have good relationships with our POCs, but what are some of the tactics, content that you use to ensure you get the DM, or even better, the C-suite executive to attend that once a quarter EBR?
Okay, awesome. So I'm writing down the questions. I just want to get everybody's questions, and then we'll go to the answer. Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Yes, so we currently have our CBR and EBR model aligned to our customer segment and service model. So, you know, if you're a strategic customer, you could get a mix of a CBR plus an annual or maybe even biannual EBR. So we actually have a distinguishing factor between the two. I'm curious, if others are prescribing it that way as well, or how they found that right balance or mix. And maybe that also goes hand in hand with the question that you had, Azim.
And for everybody, you said CBR and EBR?
Yeah, so we actually do customer business reviews versus quarterly.
So it's so interesting. So EBR is executive business review, and it can be performed on pretty much whatever cadence works. So it could be a QBR. It could be, it's interesting. I think your CBR is probably the same as an EBR, right? And so it depends on the customer typically as to what the cadence would be. And then Stacy Ward, just in case there's more than one Stacy. Stacy, you're muted. Stacy raised her hand and.
Right. Yeah, I was actually going to respond to Azim, but if this
Okay.
is just questions, I'll hold off.
Okay, cool. Thank you. If you want to unraise your hand, then and then raise it again when we get to that question. Thank you. Oh, and then all the hands. So everybody wants to respond to Azim, I think. Any other questions that you have around EBRs in a high-touch environment? Brian.
Yeah, hey guys, this is Brian LaFile. I work at Google Cloud, and I'm curious if others are sharing data in their EBRs, and if so, how transparent are you with your customers about what data you're sharing? There are obviously typical metrics, adoption, feature usage, things like that. I'm curious if there are other ancillary metrics that folks are providing their customers, and if so, what those are.
Cool, that's a good question. Alex.
Hey everybody, Alex Farmer from IncoPro. So just a quick one about capturing the feedback. You know, whatever cadence you do it, one of the key deliverables of an EBR, CBR, QBR is feedback back to the company from your customer. So would be interested to hear how leaders are trying to like programatize the dissemination of that kind of collective information from all of your customers back in to other decision makers.
That's awesome. Christy.
Hey there. So I was just going to speak to Brian's question around the data. So it depends on what the form of the conversation is that we're having. If I'm having an executive business review, I almost very rarely talk about product usage data. The data that I'm more focused on is the data that correlates back to the ROI and the customer's goals that we're focused on. So for example, we're working on, you know, my industry is fleet management. So what we do is if I've got a customer who's focused on like safety operations, for example, they're using our product as a means to improve their safety metrics. So the data that we showcase is their data. It's data that says, here's your baseline of what we started on in the partnership before we kicked off, and here's how we're progressing towards those goals. Usage data I use with my point of contact on a regular basis, and that's usually just to spearhead conversations around how they're adopting the software, but I would never go to my executives because at the end of the day, very rarely do they care how their teams or how often their teams are using my product. They want to know how is their use of the product improving their operational business practice. So that's what I focus on in EBR.
I have a follow-on question for people on the data piece. How often do you share industry trends or best practices from what you've gathered in your solution across your customer base?
Is that for me also, or is that?
It's for you or for anybody who wants to answer. I'm just curious. Since, you know, from a sharing data, there's the ROI, but then there's they come to you also because, you know, they want to know what else is happening in the market.
Yeah, so part of what we do is in the EBR is depending on the product, our product is very modular, so there's different solutions we offer. Depending on the products that they're using us for, there's different industry use cases and data around each of those. So we'll often include, but definitely not lead with, some industry stats that we're seeing as they may have changed since the last time we had a conversation. And then with regards to best practices, it's again, less focused on the product and more like policies and things that they should be instituting in their organization to improve. So how do they get it? How are they going to get to that end goal? We do also just some baseline industry related analysis based on our customers. It's all anonymized data, but we would say like, you know, customers that are in the construction industry that have a fleet size of on average 400 assets that they're tracking, we'll see with a program like this an improvement of 7% over the course of 6 months for these 3 metrics, right? Like, so we'll use anonymized data to help them understand directionally what they can anticipate seeing in a well-developed program. And then we'll share just obviously like broad industry data, because we're obviously supposed to be a thought leader in the space. So sharing that information should be part of that conversation as well. But that also happens in an ongoing conversation with our champions and points of contact, not exclusively in EBR. So we try to make sure that we are sharing that thought leadership on a regular recurring basis, and not just even in the one-on-one conversations. It's part of, you know, our blogs and webinars and things that we're pushing out there. So what we'll use in EBR is basically accumulation of the data that's been pushed out, put it and package it together in a slide or two. Brevity is key in those meetings, and then really just make sure that they have what they need so that they understand, again, we're the thought leader, we're here to be their partner and help them improve their business, and that information is usually really well received.
Awesome. So I'm going to go back to Azim's question now for answers. I see lots of hands. I'm really sorry. So from Azim's question, which I hear a lot from people, how do you get EBs to attend, or economic buyers or senior leaders at your customer or company? Who wants to answer that?
I could go. I mean, Christy alluded to it already. You need to have content that really excites an executive, right? And so that's not some of the nitty-gritty noise data. That's really about the ROI. And so I use similar strategies. And to just augment some of Christy's points, number one, from an expectation setting, the executives during the sales cycle are already prepped what to expect from the EBR, so that it's not some tech review, but it is really an executive level conversation that's between them and our executive sponsor. When we're talking about an enterprise account, where someone from the CS team is more like an MC guiding the conversation. And I also do benchmarking, and I prep my executive for the EBR to basically coach the other one to say, to your example, Christy, well, this customer of ours has even achieved XYZ, not just the baseline, but some state of excellence, because they were also able to, I don't know, take the phones off the drivers so they're not distracted, so they improve the safety margins. Trying to come up with a stupid example here to piggyback on Christy. So these are 2 additional points there.
And Courtney, we haven't heard from Courtney yet. She had her hand raised. Did you have your hand raised to answer this question?
So this one's a little bit challenging. I was just going back to the data one. I think it was still up. And again, just to piggyback on what Christy said, it really is about the whole focus of the EBR is what they've defined as successful business outcomes from, you know, the tool, and that just drives the conversation. But one other thing that I thought was helpful too is that we started doing is not just showing, hey, what have we done over the last quarter or whatever that period of time is, but then what can we expect in the future, right? That forward looking as well, and making sure that aligns with them. So.
Okay, awesome. And then if you want to unraise your hand, or I can if you want me to. Okay. And then Phyllis, did you want to answer this question? How do you get?
Yeah, and basically I think between Courtney, Christy, and Andreas, we probably hit this one home. But I wanted to add that in the initial meetings, the expectations are set. Courtney kind of touched on that too. The expectations should be set as to the cadence and what they want to see. Sometimes just what we think they want to see is not always what they want to see. So you need their input. And then something else I've done that has worked out pretty well is I've sent them a pre-agenda before the meeting, because sometimes they'll come back and say, hey, Phyllis, I want to talk about this. Be prepared for this. They may change it. And in some cases, that's happened to me. Like we talk about, they may not want to know how many employees is adopting to the product. Sometimes they do, and they'll say, because they want to go back and say, I hear you're not doing this. So it changes, and that's another good way that I found that has made me successful sometimes with Azim, with getting the executives, is getting them more engaged and not just me telling them, this is what I'm going to do in this meeting, but here's some, from what we talked about, this is the agenda. Is there anything you want to add? Is there anything you want to take out? Because their time is limited. And I know what you're thinking about, Azim, sometimes you can't get their attention, and it's like, you only get a little bit of time, so you want to get in whatever you can. I just wanted to add that to the other three.
Awesome. A quick question, and maybe you could raise your hand. I have a lot of raised hands right now. How many of you actually, coordinate with your champion? Like, are you always working with the exec sponsor or economic buyer directly to get them there? Or are you working with your champion and doing kind of pre-reads of the EBR to get the economic buyer to attend?
I think it's a prerequisite, and so with the more kind of tactical team, my point of contact, or other folks that I'm in touch on a more regular basis, I usually do a dry run, because the executive, when it comes down to from the high level ROI to, hey, here was an issue, but we're working on it. If I say this, or we are saying this, everything is fine, they're turning to their team and say, like, are they just, trying to pull some wool over our eyes? And it's like, no, we're in sync here. Yes, these are the problems. These are the solutions. This is the data. This is the validation, whatever it is, so that people are in sync. And that, again, gives the executive the confidence that attending this meeting is not a waste of time, that they don't have to do administrative work that could be done already in the background. So it's all about, okay, here are the 3 proposals that we have. What do the executives decide? Do we pick door number 1, 2, or 3? And maybe they know the answer to that one already being prepped. And so the meeting is very smooth and doesn't have any surprises to anyone. I mean, to the best extent possible, right?
And I'm gonna throw in one other question. I'm gonna jump to the how do you capture the feedback. The last or 2 weeks ago, I guess we talked about success plans, and I'm just curious in terms of the how do you structure your EBRs. Are you all including the success plan and review of the success plan in the EBRs? And now I'm going to call on people who have their hands raised. Baba. Are you, Cameron?
Actually, can I come back to that in, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes or so?
Sure. I'm going to lower your hand. Kevin.
Actually, was going to answer Aziz's question. We could skip me for now.
Okay. Did you have something new to add?
Well, the only thing I was going to add was that when it comes to bringing the executive over, one of the biggest things that I do is I send an email that in big letters reminds them how much they paid us. And and that usually like, oh, wow, we're paying them that much? Yeah, maybe I should attend this to see what exactly we're getting out of it.
Wow. In this environment, that's pretty bold.
It can be.
Curious, how, like, does anybody else do that? No.
No. Kevin, does that work for you?
It does. It does. And I'm very strategic about ROI. So that's one thing I always drill down to the very nitty gritty about all the different metrics that actually lead to them making money. So call abandonment and things like that are high on the list. So besides that that figure, I also put the different metrics that I talk about that actually displays what our ROI is, and tell them if they want to know the actual figures, They better show up.
Okay, that is good. Ido, if I said that correct.
Hey there, it's Ido, but
Ido.
it's fine. We're talking about the success plan, whether it's part of the EBR, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so the way that we see it is an EBR is a part of the success plan, predetermined in the kickoff of the onboarding as they sign on, and reminded as we go along. I don't find myself needing an email in order to invite, because an EBR is an outcome of ongoing communication. Whether it's a weekly, it's a quarterly, or a biannually meeting that is all set up. And again, about bringing the exec in, it's always through the champion. We work with a transparent deck for the EBR, work on the agenda together, and for the most part, I have the champ and the executive on the other side talking about the value that we're providing for them, rather than me presenting the entire conversation. And that is the buy-in that we get from probably having about 4 or 5 meetings prior to the EBR itself, and getting everybody on board. 0 surprises.
That's awesome. I saw a warning sign come up. I want to jump to the question that I think that Alex had. How do you capture feedback from the EBR and bring it back to the company? And I'm going to call on people whose hands are raised. If you don't want to answer this question, lower your hand. Effie.
Hi. So the way we capture feedback, I'll take a step back and I'll just share our structure is BRs and EBRs. So the EBRs are for the executive sponsors, so the CXOs or V whatevers, the V levels. And the BRs are usually more with the champion than the end user. If there are higher tiered customers, it is essential that we usually have a representative from product there. So because most of the time the feedback that we'll get, and we also put in the whatever business reviews, whether it's an executive or the regular business reviews, we always put a roadmap. And similar to, I forgot who mentioned how you give industry recommendations, we do the same. I think that's a really helpful tip there. To really, customers, no matter what, SMBs, enterprise, they always want to know how they compare to their peers and their competitors, and they don't want to be left behind. So again, we bring in products so that there's sort of this automatic feedback. And even when we do our executive business reviews, we usually, if they're especially a very higher tier, we kill 2 birds with 1 stone, as we get their feedback from the C-levels, and we also have an executive sponsor internally. So in very specific occasions, if they're really strategic, we'll have our CEO join as well, if not some other C-level internally. I think many will agree with me. As CSMs, we're sort of like we're the ones who touch probably every department within an organization. If anyone saw Pulse, we're like the spoke in the middle. So so all of those representatives from each spoke have to be in these business reviews, you know, in order to provide feedback.
Awesome. Jackie.
Hi there. So similarly to what Effie was saying, we bring the entire team into our EBRs. I got a little passionate this year that if the executive team, account management team can't be a part of it, then I get their bonus. So it's been interesting on how they've been joining on a quarterly basis, even reminding me sometimes. But we also take all of that information. We have someone from marketing there. We have product there. And if we have things right there immediately, if there's positive quotes or a positive case study, we immediately make the ask, can we turn that into a case study? Or if there is something that is a product offering, we immediately make the ask to have another meeting to talk to building it out with the team so that we can kind of keep that relationship going. And even though it's one of those slow down to speed up, because then we're always aware of what those things are, and we can continue to build those relationships, but then they become part of our team in building out the product and the success. They recognize those things. So
I think that's awesome. I have a question I want to ask, and then I see Alex has his hand his hand raised, and this was his question. So I'll go to him after this. But to get that, sort of, I'm hearing, product, exec sponsor, marketing, you have it, a pretty good base of executives attending. How many EBRs do they attend? Like, how many customers do you do this for typically?
We do it with all of our customers on a quarterly basis. So it's already planned out. The days are already planned out. If we don't have a meeting, we stutter it out. So if we don't have a meeting, then everybody gets that time back. But it's just kind of the expectation that every other Thursday there will be a QBR. Or if there's nothing, sometimes we'll just all meet together and see what we can get with the feedback. With us right now, it is kind of special times because we're going to our newer version. So a lot of this we're trying to get right. We have to get it right, as we upgrade. So we do it with all of them. We're all involved.
Awesome. Okay. Alex, I just want to get back to you. This was your question.
Yeah, I was just going to share a perspective because these is really helpful and really insightful, and it sounds like Jackie, a lot of time for a lot of people, which is good that we get the execs in there across the the structure of your business as well, which is something I think we've struggled to do a little bit. In absence of that, one of the things that we do when we have we call it an executive success review because some of our customers can't. Quarterly puts a lot of pressure on making it happen every quarter, right? So kept it a little vague there, but we write up a summary of the feedback of what those, the customer's achievement, kind of path to achievement of their business goals, any product feedback they have. It gets written up in our customer success plan object in Salesforce, and when it gets saved, it sends an email out to our entire exec team. So every week, every 2 weeks, we're putting customer feedback directly in their inbox, which has been really helpful in kind of transitioning. We're enterprise, but we're still pretty scale up. So it's been helpful transitioning a C-level to understand that the last customer they spoke to 6 months ago isn't the pulse of our entire customer base. We also, in that conversation, will kind of submit a subjective customer satisfaction rating as well. So, we can report on the percentage of customers who are extremely satisfied, somewhat dissatisfied, or extremely dissatisfied each quarter. And we can kind of look at trends there. And the last thing that we don't do yet, but I'm pushing forward on now, is we kind of try and push to more of a tech-enabled engagement with our customers, is upload the decks we use onto our customer community. So customers, executive sponsors, if we can get them to log in, or champions can always pull the cadence of executive review decks that we've delivered as a separate section to the portal or the community that we built. So they always kind of have access to see their journey and their progress, and don't have to go fish through their inbox to revisit the presentation. But this is really helpful, guys. So appreciate your answers.
Awesome. And David, you've had your hand up for a little bit.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to share, Cheryl, was that, and something I haven't heard yet, is what we do is we also take the feedback that the customer gave us at all levels, and we include that in the EBR. So when the executives come in, they will see what the current NPS score is. They'll see quantitative and qualitative feedback we got from their team, their staff. It could have been the champion, the key sponsor, the day-to-days, whoever it happens to be. And then we want to make sure that they're aligned with the same feedback, whether or not they responded to the last survey or whatever that survey was. So, if they're not aligned, we want to talk about that feedback, and we want to make sure we gain their alignment at the executive level.
That's interesting. And Andreas, you've also, are you?
Sorry, I got another
Okay.
call, so I'll unraise myself. Apologies.
Okay, that's okay. Jeremy.
Yeah, my question is actually to follow up on David's comment around the feedback from all levels that you share in that EBR. Is that data on the team that's shared? Is that anonymized, or is that actually call out specific people? Because I've seen that could go really good or could go really bad if you're calling out specific people, especially if they're in the room for that conversation. So how do you massage that in a way that doesn't make somebody look really bad in a conversation, if that makes sense?
Yeah, Jeremy, great question. We will never share information with a person's name unless we've talked to them beforehand. That's the big cardinal sin, and I think I put that in the chat before. You never want to embarrass anybody on a team in front of their executives. You always want to try to make them look like a hero. So we will either put the verbatims up there and we will sanitize the names off of there, or we'll just put generic information up there. But if there's a specific piece of feedback that we want to share, we'll go to that person and specifically ask them if they'll allow us to share that in the EBR with their executives. And if they say no, we won't share it.
Awesome.
Thanks for that clarification, David.
And then Baba, you wanted to add?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was putting my toddler to sleep earlier when I came up. Well, the only thing I wanted to add was to an earlier question that came up about I guess success plans and comparing customers to where they stand. We're actually not doing EBRs and QBRs yet, so this is all great for me to take in. So I'm kind of preparing some of my ideas, and I agree with what Ido said with how we want to start with the onboarding process with the success plan. And one of the charts that I have is it's like an adoption curve of showing different use cases of our applications and where the customer is in that journey, and kind of putting like a peer group to say, okay, this is where your peer group is, and this is your peer group that's best in class. This is kind of where they are, and you're here, and we're going to help you, evolve to this part in the journey.
Awesome. And I want to get back to Sarah. I don't know that we answered your question. So would you re-ask it, and let's see if we can get some answers.
I think all the feedback was really helpful. I think, for me, I'm curious of the mix, right? So many of you had stated that there is a distinction between a CBR, QBR, and an EBR. And then, are you doing, I guess my question would be, what is the frequency of your EBR? Are you doing that? Are your CBRs and QBRs truly quarterly? Do you define it by segment? And is your EBR annually, biannually, and is that defined by segment? Awesome.
Thank you for re-asking. I realized when I was looking at my notes, I didn't think we got there. Effie.
So we define it not by segments, although segments get obviously business, like the higher segments get business reviews and the lowers don't, but we also define it by journey. Typically the E's in the EBRs don't have time, and one of the challenging things is even getting them on board to even have a business review. So those in a great case will be every 2 quarters, twice a year. With a minimum of 1, that's a KPI that we have, that the executive has to be in it at least once, but ideally twice. I would find it very rare that any enterprise C-level would be there on a quarterly basis. The BRs are done mostly on quarterly basis if they're on an onboarding process, because that's the most that's the time that you need it as the most updates. Where were we last quarter? Where are we now? Where should we be next quarter? And then when they're sort of like, however anyone calls it, live, business as usual, whatever, then again, the enterprise customers tend to not have as much availability, and they'll review business reviews as annoying, and it could harm the relationship. So again, we aim almost for the same as the executives, probably a bit like more to at least 3 times a year, not every quarter.
Thank you. And Andreas, you had.
Yes. And to Effie's point, I'm using the same recommended cadence, but when we talk about early on already about the success plan, it's like, well, what should the cadence be? And then also adopt it along the way, right? In an EBR, it's like, okay, this is really critical. We should meet again in 6 weeks because the executive wants it, or we should reconvene in 6 months, and allow a little bit of that flexibility instead of going into a panic because you haven't talked to your executive sponsor in 3 months. And that I felt was also more helpful for the executives, because they're a true partner in this discussion. This is not something that we're throwing at them because we've all been in all these forums and everything, and we have to do EBRs. So customer, we will do an EBR if you like it or not, right? Kind of thing. Then from the EBRs also it's been kind of the reviews with more our day-to-day contacts. I have customers where with some of the core team, we're a part of their weekly or bi-weekly kind of scrum meetings, what they do internally to get things doing, just to keep the pulse of the customer, right? And with others, depending on what other milestones you defined and what other communication points you had. And so when you go to the EBR, again, the entire team underneath is already aligned and in sync, and the executive doesn't get any surprises.
No, okay, that's good. And I wanted, Sancieri, did I ruin your name?
Hi. Yes, Sansi for short is much easier. Thank you for attempting. It's not easy. Yeah, so I guess I want to echo and add. So Effie, you mentioned the importance of having a KPI of where you want to set guidelines. We hope to have an EBR 1 to 2 times a year. And then Andreas, you mentioned the importance of understanding the executive's cadence for Connect. We do both. So what we do is we do have segments, but our segments are based on personas. So if we have Trek Bikes that really only wants to talk to us once a year, super happy, very close connection with C-level execs there, then we set a cadence in our customer success platform that tells us, according to this executive, they're looking to connect on our EBRs at this cadence. Now with GM, with General Motors, they want to be having those connects actually 4 times a year. So we meet with C-level execs every quarter. And so we set a different persona, and then we align customers along with those personas so that we are making sure that Connect happens, but making sure it happens at a cadence that makes sense to the exec. That's been hugely helpful for us because we don't waste revs getting in the red, feeling like Trek should have talked to us by now, but knowing that really that's not Jeremy's desired calendar of Connect. So that's been fantastic. And being able to track those personas has been really helpful for us to do that. And it's taken a weight off the shoulder of the customer success team because they're now better aligned with the customer.
I'm curious. I know we're going to get pulled back into the other room in a second, but how are you tracking the personas?
Yes. So I'm co-founder of a customer success platform called Koala. So we use our own technology.
That's nice. Okay.
Yeah.
I think, 4 minutes. I feel like I've just all of a sudden I've got so much. Time was going so fast. Does anybody else have anything? And I'm going to start to call on people because now there's no hands raised. Alex.
Snuck in there. Sorry, I'll unraise my hand now. Just quickly, I wanted to go back to one of the previous questions, if I may, that I didn't get a chance to just quickly weigh in on, which was how you get the exec. One of the key things that I found really successful is, I think we've alluded to it by kind of talking to the exec sponsor, benchmarking, right? How do you compare against other companies? So totally agree with that. But the really stubborn execs that, won't respond to one, a CSM's email, after email after email. One of the things we found really successful is kind of conspiring with your champion to be the one that does the presentation. Because ultimately, the champion is the one who's using the software to achieve a business goal. And, usually will report to the exec. So we actually we'll do the wrapper, right? Here's who we are, here's the intro, maybe we do the product roadmap at the end, ask for their feedback in the middle. But the bit about value that's been achieved, we have the champion actually present. So the EBR is completely organized by the champion. It's the champion reporting back to the business the impact of the technology, and we're there really just as a facilitator and a subject matter expert for the product itself. And that's been a little bit more convoluted and kind of more challenging to engineer, but successful when it's executed correctly. So just wanted to throw that in there.
That's awesome. I think it's really important to get your champion involved.
Yeah. Hey, Cheryl. I've actually have a customer. I'm doing that same thing that Alex is talking about with, and it can be a ton of work. But if you have a really solid relationship with your champion and they are really bought into the partnership with your organization, and they know your organization inside and out. They know your product. They know the ROI. They know how to speak you just as well as you know how to speak you, and you can hand that over to them. Then yeah, there's nothing better than having your customer talk your product in that meeting than having you be there, and you're almost more of as an advisor to them in their own meeting as opposed to you running it for them. So yeah, Alex, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, it's something that I need. I'm in a relatively new organization now, but I might have to start exploring that now with my new customers that I'm working with.
That's awesome. It looks like we're all now going back to the main session. Sorry, Kevin. I saw you had your hand raised, but I think we have 42 seconds if you have anything.
It's okay. I'm actually just going to ask this in the tribe group that we have.
Okay. Oh, awesome. Cool. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Great discussion.
Awesome. Thank you. It was good. Appreciate everyone's feedback.